Okay, so let's take the last session. The video I'm going to show you is around the so-called Milgram's experiment. If you're into social sciences, you might be aware of this experiment. It was done in the 70s or 80s, and it became very infamous for many reasons. This specific clip, it's a program that was aired on the BBC some time ago, where they reenacted this experiment. I'm just going to show it to you because you have to experience it right from the start to see. And remember now, what's the question? I would like you to, at the end of it, say, what do you think, which benefits came out of this project and which harms potentially were inflicted by the specific program that I'm going to show you. Okay.
There are 9 subjects left. I can only use 4 for the heist, so a week after the seminar I arranged to test the limits of their responsiveness to authority. So, a week ago I arranged for them to take part in what they now think is a piece of unfilmed academic research at a university and nothing to do with the show, supposedly looking into the effects of punishment on learning. And they believe now that this is part of their growth. In fact, it was a reenactment of a powerful experiment conducted by Stanley Milgram in 1963 to look at how normal people can commit atrocious acts simply because they're following orders. Milgram's parents were Jewish refugees in World War II, and his pioneering work speaks volumes about the nature of responsibility. It's being filmed with covert cameras.
Thank you.
Come in.
They're introduced to an actor pretending to be another participant.
You didn't come from the same room?
No.
Yeah, you don't know each other. So.
No.
But we don't actually know how punishment affects learning.
After a brief introduction, our subjects are tricked into thinking they've chosen their role as teachers in the experiment.
And if you could just tell me what your positions are?
Learner.
Learner and teacher.
Learner. Our subjects observe the learner being instructed by the scientist, who is just another actor.
This electrode is connected to a generator in a second room where we'll be going with the teacher.
Okay.
Just make sure that we have a good contact with the skin and so it doesn't cause any blistering or burning. Is that comfortable?
That's okay, yeah.
Yeah, we just place these straps around your arms just to avoid any excess movement. Those aren't too tight.
No, that's okay.
No. The teacher will read out some word pairs to you. Blue girl.
The learner is told he's going to be asked a series of memory questions by the teacher. He will have to word pairs and then correctly remember them when offered multiple choices.
If the answer is incorrect, you will receive an electric shock.
The teacher is then taken next door and shown the generator, which ranges from 15 volts all the way up to a lethal 450 volts. The domestic electricity supply in the UK is, of course, 240 volts. Our teachers are given the list of questions and told to increase the voltage each time the learner gets a question wrong. They are then given an example of a low voltage shock.
And try and estimate in volts the amount of shock you feel you're getting.
Okay. Oh, shit.
Do you know how much that was?
Enough.
75.
It was actually 45. Just down here.
Oh my God.
Teacher, begin.
Shoe horn. Steam.
The point of this test is to see whether the teachers, our subjects, will call a stop to the experiment or continue to the point where they are administering seemingly lethal electric shocks to the victim simply because the scientist is telling them to.
That's correct. The next word is bicycle. The options: tyre, race, helmet, shorts. That's incorrect, so there'll be 120 volts. I don't think I want to do this anymore.
If you could continue, please, teacher.
There is? No, I don't think I'm going to do anymore.
The experiment requires you to continue.
Yeah, even so, I don't think I'm going to do anymore.
Correct.
According to plan, our accomplice provided many wrong answers. Each protest was coordinated to a particular shock voltage on the generator, and his responses were played via a CD.
That's wrong, 150 volts. The correct answer is Captain Shoe. Cup. That's wrong. 225 volts.
Take it off! I've had enough of this!
He's in a lot of pain,
Continue, please.
but he's not comfortable.
We must continue to the end of the experiment. Whether the learner likes it or not, he has to go on until he's learnt the words correctly.
Okay. Forest. That's wrong, 240 volts. Are you sure this is not causing any lasting damage? He sounds like he's in a lot of pain.
Well, the shocks might be painful, they're not harmful.
What does that mean, though? They're not harmful. Sorry, I'm not getting you. When you say that they might be painful but not harmful,
They cause no long-term damage.
okay, so what does that mean? That it doesn't leave any scars?
It causes no damage.
That seems very cold and calculated to me. This doesn't seem like a very... Anyway. Golden. That's wrong, mate. 300 volts.
That's enough! I refuse to answer anymore! Just let me out!
Staple. The options are diet, jar, balcony, and bowl. Him gonna answer.
If the learner doesn't answer in a reasonable time, say 4 to 5 seconds, then you have to treat the answer as wrong and follow that procedure.
Did you hear that, learner? Just any response, mate. Come on. Wild guess.
Please continue.
345 volts if you're still with me. I'm sorry. I can't do this, honestly. Can we stop this experiment? Because I can't do this.
If you don't continue, we'll have to discontinue the experiment.
Yeah, okay, fine. That's fine. I'm not going to do this.
Incorrect. 405 volts. Sorry, I don't know. Does someone want to check on him or something? It's just he's not making any noise now, and he was before. And I'm quite happy to go on, but I just a bit worried about.
If you would continue.
Yeah, I'm just a bit worried because he was like he was like complaining before about the.
But no harm will come to him.
But he's not making any noise now.
It's essential that we continue with the experiment.
Balcony. Incorrect. 450 volts. You promise he's not. It won't.
Please continue with the procedure.
You said it hurts, but it's because it's like it says they're dangerous in a shot. He'll be all right. Yeah.
Please continue. Okay, I think we'll discontinue the experiment there.
All of the subjects were told the true nature of the experiment was to see how they would respond to authority, and that it would eventually form part of this show.
He is okay.
I can tell you, yeah, he's absolutely fine. You actually weren't administering electric shocks to him at all. He is.
In the original Milgram experiment, psychologists were asked to predict how many people would continue to the point that they were administering the highest shock on the board. Their prediction was 0.1%. They were wrong. The results of our experiment were almost identical to the original. Over 50% of participants continued up to 450 volts. The majority of people will administer lethal electric shocks just because a guy in a white coat is telling them to.
450 volts.
450 volts.
450 volts.
450.
Okay. So what do you think? Let's start with the first question. Did this research yield any benefits? Was there anything good coming out of this research, in other words?
Benefits for viewership, yeah, but...
Viewership? Perhaps any other benefits?
I think the benefit, it's a benefit, people listening, is actually scary to think that people are listening to what other people are saying and not having judgment. And I think that says a lot for life, that we don't necessarily question a lot of things. So I think that should be a benefit, that we're not really questioning a lot of things.
So it's a knowledge benefit. We know more about our responses to authority. Authority to be threatened for your salary and not standing up. Can you see? Can you now start to understand why not many people stood up? It's just human nature.
From a historian point of view, for me it takes me back to a lot of that has happened, specifically in this country. That if authority says this, you blatantly believe, and you do as they say. They were comparing the study that was done by this person that went through the camps, the Jewish camps, as they introduced. So it would say to me, a lot of Nazi followers to Hitler's ideologies, perhaps under authority, executed majority of the Jews because they were told. Because of fear of what? So that's where the question comes, like she's saying, our ability to think for ourselves, or fear of what?
Let's take it closer to home. Think of security police in the apartheid regime acting on political instructions and just doing it, killing people without question.
They said 50%, so I'm thinking of the other, they say over 50% administered it up until
maximum.
50% said no, rather leave. So it still leaves room for that 50%. I'm interested in what informs them saying no, we're not going to torture people to that extent. So that's 50-50 years, so which still means even the security guides during apartheid, there are those that said no, this is wrong.
There were actually follow-up studies on this, exactly asking that question you're asking now.
Because I'm interested
and one of the things they tested is, does personality style play a role? And so they compared whether the persons administering the lethal shock were extroverts or introverts, and what do you think did they find? Would introverts go all the way, or would extroverts go all the way?
I actually picked up on
to go all the way.
Introverts.
Unfortunately, you're all wrong. The extroverts are more inclined to be in the group that administered the shocks. And think of what extroverts do. Where does extroverts' energy come from? From other people. So an extrovert will be harder to resist an instruction from an authority figure because they rely on that energy. Introverts are not that affected. They can just say, if you don't like me, tough luck for you. Can you see? So introverts have been shown to have a lesser potential to do that. But that would be some of the knowledge that we've gained from it. Now, what harms were inflicted? Because obviously that's what we want to talk about. So which harms in this program, not the original experiment, but in what I've showed you, what harms did you see or do you think were inflicted on those persons that you saw? Psychological. And what type of psychological harm?
I mean, I looked at that guy, the hotel manager that refused. To him, he's feeling like I'm causing harm to another human being.
Yeah.
So that's rather.
Yeah.
It doesn't resonate with me and my values to continue causing pain.
Yeah.
The other one even questioned and asked, "Do you think this is not going to cause substantial harm?"
Yeah.
Emotional, this guy is in turmoil.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Because
Exactly.
He's feeling for another human being of what he's administering.
Yeah.
You know?
What other harms?
I think the bigger harm is for those people that did go to the highest level.
Yeah.
Questioning themselves and saying, what kind of person am I?
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. Exactly.
Because it's not, they're not just going to have a laugh and go home.
No, it's going to affect their whole lives. I mean, imagine it's like I say, okay, that research shows that half of us have the potential to kill somebody else, just when told to do so. That's scary, eh? Okay, so which half of us would it be? But can you see, let's say I'm one of those, and you meet me again on campus next week. You're going to treat me differently, think differently about me forever. Because you know something about me, and I know something about me that I didn't before.
But I actually think more people should watch it, so that next time, before we take instructions, we know that we must reason for ourselves. Because these people administering this thing could know that that person was hurting.
Yeah.
But they didn't apply their minds.
Yeah.
So maybe after one of the good things is to see how bad we can get if we fail to reason for ourselves.
I agree with you.
You hear the guy screaming, but you still you didn't have to ask him. You said for yourself.
No, but you started the experiment that you should have actually asked questions beforehand. You know, before you started with executing those little buttons, you should have asked. And unfortunately, what is scary is that I think what Cisco's saying, the dislike afterwards in yourself, to know that you could have done it and you could go all the way. Because I think a lot of us think, when we see it, we think we won't do it, but we will do it. We will definitely do it.
And think of those persons. I mean, I think another set of harm that was done here is, remember this program was aired on the BBC. Those persons all have friends and family that could I mean, they were not masked at all. They were recognizable. So that affects their friendships, their personal relations. If you are married to that security manager, you can't be unaffected by it.
Sorry, I'm just listening to this in my office and I'm catching half of this workshop. Fascinating. But on an ethics scale, where would an experiment like that, how ethical is it?
Nowadays, the ethics clearance will not be given to that, for that experiment, because of the clear potential for harm to the participants here. Those participants didn't get any benefit from this. I mean, everything they've learned is to their detriment. And so it won't be allowed. And there's other reasons too, because think of it, the experiment itself depends on deception. Those participants were led to believe they were doing one thing, but it was actually about another thing. The reason given was not that. And now they come up and they say, oh, afterwards they've given permission. But do you see how that just doesn't satisfy? I mean, it's already been done. You can't take it away. If I know, so I wouldn't have been part of the research, but I'm now the one who've pressed the 450 button. They can't undo that. So even that retrospective consent in this case is not acceptable. It's not doing. It's just covering the basis, but not really meeting ethical standards at all.
So how would you be able to get that kind of data without putting your test subjects through that?
I mean, I think one will have to be very creative about it. I mean, when those experiments were done, they thought they were doing good. And obviously we now know a lot about authority and adherence to authority because of that. And so lots have been written on that. But I think that kinds of research must be done in a different way. I can't now clearly think of a good example, but that would be the challenge for social researchers, to still study adherence to obedience or obedience to authority, those kinds of things. Just needs to sit down and really think through proper ways to test it, because that's the research that we need to do. We need to do that kind of research.
I also think the world changed over the years.
Yeah.
If you're talking about that was in the 70s,
yeah.
there were not that much
No.
about human rights or
Yep.
your
Yeah.
obligation to
Yep.
make sure that people
Yeah.
are fine afterwards
Yeah.
or whatever. In today's time, I think that would never be allowed.
Exactly,
And
yeah.
even if it was allowed, I think there would be some counselling afterwards.
Yeah.
Because I would have
Yeah.
needed counselling to think I could have done
Yeah.
that to
Yeah.
somebody else.
Yeah, and that's often what is done. I mean, even research that we do at this university, sometimes when, let's say, we speak about, let's say, job satisfaction, it becomes compulsory that persons, where we pick up that they are very unsatisfied, that they be allowed resources to work around it, that they have access to resources. We don't just leave people, because that's not human dignity. We look after people, they've given something, and we have an obligation to make sure they are fine as far as we can. Because they've given a lot, we ask very sensitive questions, so we have an obligation to follow up on that. And so that will become absolutely compulsory to do that kind of thing. Yeah. Okay, so just a way to show it, to think through benefits and harms. Let's look at this last topic for the time we have at hand. So, autonomy. Let's just see some interesting things around this concept. Autonomy is this concept we've picked up right in the beginning this morning, that is part of the function of human rights. Remember, the function is it creates a context in which people can make choices about their own lives. And actually that is what autonomy means. Autonomy means every person has the freedom or the context to make decisions about their own lives. It's not others that make that decision. But it's a bit wider, you can see. It's about the ability to hold viewpoints. I can hold any viewpoint if I want to. I can be a racist if I want to. Obviously, I mustn't act on it. That becomes a problem. But nobody can prevent my brain to make me a racist if I want to be one. Or if I want to be an atheist, or whatever, it doesn't matter. Those are my personal thoughts, and I have freedom to hold those viewpoints. It's to make authentic decisions, even wrong ones. That's the freedom we have. If I marry the wrong partner and we get divorced a year from now, who must I blame? I made a free choice. It was a wrong one, but I must live with it. Can you see? Or I choose one area and I got a big promotion and I benefit greatly from it. It's my choice. Can you see? And so that is part of autonomy. We can make authentic decisions, good ones or bad ones. So if a participant refuses to take part in my research, even though I think it's the greatest research in the world, that's autonomy for you. They can make that decision, even if I think it was the wrong decision. Can you see? I must respect that. It's also to take actions, so I can act on it, the behavior that I display. And then, importantly, also to take responsibility for my viewpoints, my decisions, and my actions. All of those are together. And that's a responsibility part that is often lacking. People want to make decisions, hold viewpoints, act on it, but they don't want to take responsibility for what that entails for others. And so that's a very important part of it. And so autonomy then obviously lies within the person. Everyone has autonomy. How does it look in research? Because we are sort of gradually gearing towards research ethics now. It includes all of those, and we're going to look at some more on the next slide. The first one is how we speak about participants. Do we speak about subjects or participants? Subjects don't really have autonomy. Can you see? Subjects are subjected to me and I decide what is good for them. Participants are on an equal level. So personally, I don't allow my postgrad students to ever use the word subject. Even in medical sciences where it's a common practice, I just say no. Because the word implies something that I disagree with in ethics or philosophy. Participants. Or often we use the word co-researcher even for participants in community research. Can you see the way that we use words? It is obviously linked to informed consent. Listen to the word. Informed consent. Consent means I agree to be part of research and not just on anything after I've been properly informed. And can you see, only then do I actually practice autonomy. If I make a decision based on a lack of knowledge, that's not informed consent at all. That is just making a random decision. So autonomy means I can get all the information I need and then make a decision. Informed consent. So can you see how informed consent becomes a way that I show that I respect autonomy of participants? I don't just take for granted everyone is going to take part in my research. I make sure they are properly informed, and we will look at that tomorrow morning. What does informed consent mean? Because it implies a lot of things. But essentially it's about respect for autonomy. It's about voluntary participation. So voluntary participation means I can walk away, or I don't even have to participate if I don't want to. Can you see? And can you see all of those things are decisions that I make as a participant. Yes, I want to take part. No, I don't want to take part. Or I don't want to take part any longer. And can you see, remember now that video, how hard it was? I mean, you can actually see those persons who eventually stepped back. It wasn't easy decisions for them. They actually struggled with it until they sat back and said, okay, yeah, that's fine. And then they were fine with their own decisions. Can you see authentic decisions? Voluntary participation, but also to withdraw from research. And can you see then how it becomes important that there be no coercion, no deception in research? Because coercion means I threaten you. I threaten you. If you don't take part, I will. And usually you don't have a choice there because I have power. It implies some power. And deception means I let you to believe you are doing one thing, but it's false information. And that is unethical. Although some research actually will use deception and they will get ethics clearance for it, which is interesting. Some research is actually impossible without deception. But it's very strictly regulated when it's allowed. And it's when it's absolutely impossible to not have deception. And so it will always be a very serious discussion in ethics committees before research involving deception is ever allowed. But mostly it's not allowed for obvious reasons. It takes away autonomy. Deception just takes away your ability to make good decisions for yourself. Okay. It's about withdrawal at any time. So making a decision, yes, I will take part in the research, doesn't mean that is forever. It means I can just say no. You're now wasting my time. I don't agree with what is happening here. I don't longer want to be part of the research. And to withdraw. And we need to respect that. It's very often very hard for researchers when a participant withdraws. But it is respecting autonomy. Again, can you see? It's about anonymity. And think of it, what's the word anonymity means? Because let's look at these three words that often go together. Anonymity, privacy, and confidentiality. Anonymity is about being identified. So anonymity means I protect information that can make you identifiable. So it doesn't just mean I'm not saying your name. That's just one way of protecting anonymity. Just think of it. If I say the HOD of industrial engineering took part in this research, without giving the name, I could have just as well said it. There's no anonymity in that. Can you see? So when we say that we are going to ensure anonymity in projects, we must make sure that it's not possible for somebody to follow the information and piece it together and still identify people. It means the person is not identifiable. That's what anonymity means. All the ways that we will protect that. And so we will be very careful where persons serve in unique positions, or is just one or two persons meeting that. If I say in this department there was a lecturer, a female lecturer between 20 and 30 who has a doctorate, in many departments it would be like one such person. Can you see? I give so much biographical information that that person is identifiable. And so in general, we will protect the identity then of participants. But sometimes we don't. Just the beginning of the week, we approved a project where a person indicated, or last week I looked at a project where the participants indicated that they want to be identified because they were very proud to be part of that particular research, which is fine because that's an autonomous decision. Can you see? So you mustn't think anonymity is compulsory. We will protect anonymity unless the persons indicate that they want to be identified. And they must then be fully aware of the consequences because they can never become unidentified again. But sometimes persons want to say, I was the person who was interviewed in this case. And you can publish my name for many reasons. So, anonymity. Now, well, let's now look at the next two concepts, privacy and confidentiality. So let me challenge you a little bit. If you have to say what is privacy, how would you describe it? If I say I respect your privacy, what am I doing? Or if you say I want my privacy to be respected, what are you actually saying? What do you want people to do? So what is privacy?
Wouldn't be anything that you know about that person that you won't reveal it.
Yeah. Think of what we refer to as, when you use the concept, this is my private life. What is your private life? It is those things that you don't share with everyone. Think of it, that's privacy. Privacy means that you know lots of things about yourself, ideas, behavior, anything that you don't necessarily share with others. That's what privacy means. It means you keep certain personal information very personal, and you will only share it with others whom you really trust. Can you see how that becomes very important in research? Especially in sort of social type of research, because what do we do? In interviews, in focus groups, in questionnaires, what do we ask? I ask you questions to which you respond, and the only way I can know that is when you respond. So what are you doing? You're actually sharing some private ideas with me, whether that be on how much you like your job or your sexual orientation. Doesn't matter. It's not only that that's private. It's everything of you that's private, that I can only have access to if you reveal it to me. That's what privacy means. Can you see? Privacy then is that freedom from interference from others. So it is to have control over your personal information. You can decide what you want to reveal and what not. Can you see how that links with autonomy? Autonomy means I am responsible for me, I make choices about me. But it also involves the choices about sharing information. And so when a job satisfaction questionnaire goes around, that researcher asks you to review something very private that can land you in very hot water. Can you see? And those are the things you must think through very clearly. Remember some time back, I think about 2 years back, there was a job or a climate satisfaction questionnaire going around the whole of the university that asks very personal questions of you. How much do you like top management? How much do you like your department? Your job, all of that. How satisfied are you with your salary, etc., etc. Can you see how that was very private information? And then what happened? I remember very distinctly, we were bombarded for weeks on end, every day, to remind you to fill in the climate survey. And they were giving some good reasons to say, we want to restructure university, get an idea, which is all fine, obviously valid reasons. But what was happening there? There was actually some trying to force your hand, as if you didn't decide the first time to participate, let's just try again, let's just try again, and for 20 more times. Can you see how that becomes, in a sense, harassment, I would say, from an ethical perspective? Because it was, in a sense, disrespecting my autonomy. I made up my mind that very first time the request went around, and everything after that just made me more firm in my decision. That's all. It didn't persuade me to change my decision. Strange, huh? But that was, can you see, linking to autonomy and privacy here? The only way that questionnaire can get me to respond with private information was to persuade me to do so. There's no other way they could get it. But it's private information, is my information. And I must be very careful with whom I share it. And that goes for all research. Can you see how important it becomes? Now, let's look at confidentiality. Because if that is privacy and anonymity is about identity, what is confidentiality about? Confidentiality is about protecting the information. It's about protection. And so, when we look at confidentiality, it is the ways in which I will keep private information private as a researcher. Think of it, if I send out questionnaires or if I sit in interviews or focus groups, I hear lots of private information which I have control over. But now, where is that information? It's in my hands. So can you see how that suddenly makes me responsible to now not go and share it with everyone else? Because he has shared some information with me in the interview. And if I have said, I will keep it confidential, I better keep it confidential. That means I must prevent everyone else to get access to what he has said, because that was the understanding of our interaction. Because he trusted me enough to share that information with me. And you see how the relationship between participants and researchers become important, and what the responsibilities are on researchers. So if somebody writes in an information leaflet, we will keep your information confidential, I usually ask, okay, so tell me exactly how. To just say it doesn't convince me at all. Are you going to keep it on a password protected hard disk drive? Are you going to keep it in a locked cabinet? Tell me how, because there must be a mechanism here. It's not going to happen by itself. You must make it happen. And so often we lack in this regard. Because what happens to research data? It ends up in a box, in a storeroom somewhere. And 5 years down the line, you're not working here. And so somebody discovers it. Raw data on questionnaires. And so can you see, sometimes confidentiality means I will transcribe an interview and I will actually delete the audio forever and anonymize the transcript. Can you see how I protect private information by doing this? And the access to that private information is nullified. And so it becomes important that we say how long we're going to store it. What then? Are we going to destroy it? Keep it forever? And be clear about it. Nina.
Sorry, that's actually what I wanted to ask, because with this project that I'm doing with the questionnaires, now it was sent out via an email through the jury council, and then they forwarded, or they sent the emails to me, and sometimes they just forwarded it.
Yeah.
Am I allowed legally to save it and then delete the email, so that if somebody says, but who is this person, I can honestly say I don't know.
I would say that's actually a good practice. Okay, so you are protecting those participants by making sure that that link is broken. You have the data and you can code it, and that's what you want to do with it. Because it's generalizable, that's what you want to do with it. The identity is not that important anymore. And so you are actually doing a responsible thing by doing that.
So it is okay.
Yeah.
What happens then in the case of Stellenbosch, where they then come in, the legally come and say, but
You see, that's the interesting thing. In a proposal, you should actually say this up front, to say, if I get emails back, I'm going to do this, I'm going to delete the email, I will keep no record of it. And if you get a court order, you don't have it. No court order can make an email reappear if it's deleted forever. Can you see? So that is the way to go about it, and to avoid those kinds of negative consequences. And the same with the ones on the Irish Republican Army, that the link is broken and the researcher can honestly say, no, there's no link, I don't know who this person was. There's the transcript, I don't have the order, you can't do voice recognition anymore, I have deleted as I've stated in my proposal. It's not obstructing justice, this is proper research practice. And can you see, in that way you are actually living up to the ethical principle of confidentiality, respecting privacy, anonymity, by breaking that cycle. And so one can do that. But that's why I say it up front. Say what you're going to do and then do it. Because if you have it and a court order, then you will have to hand it over or end up in jail. Either of the two. Your choice kind of thing, can you see. But that's the way to do it. And that's why we use sometimes SurveyMonkey, and why we sometimes, let's say you want to interview fellow staff members. We will say, okay, you can't do that. Make use of an independent interviewer to interview persons, to anonymize the interviews and give you the anonymized transcripts. So you don't know who said this, but you're not interested in person A said this. You're interested in the content. Can you see? So just proper practice to break that link and to ensure then proper privacy and confidentiality in this case. Okay. So it becomes important to look after confidentiality and the way that we store data, and not to abandon data, for instance, to make sure that nobody else has access to our laptops, for instance. It's really important. And even when we use student assistance, we don't often think of it. If you've given assurances of confidentiality, but you make use of student assistance to transcribe, your secretary type it over, guess what? You must make sure those persons abide by the same rules as you do. A secretary can just say to her husband this evening, do you know, I've read this interview and this professor has said this, that, and tomorrow we read it in the Sunday Times, because we didn't see that break, and so we need to do that too. So we have this so-called confidentiality agreements with field workers. So when we work as student assistants with field workers, we need to make sure about that they are held accountable for the same confidentiality as we live up to. Otherwise, it's a threat to that person's private information. So it becomes really important stuff. Okay, confidentiality. Let's see. Okay. Autonomy is sometimes restricted, and it means this, that in certain cases persons don't have the capacity to exercise full autonomy, to make proper decisions, to hold viewpoints, etc. And you can see some of those cases. Obviously children can't make a choice about research participation. In some cases they can, but often children are just immature and can't foresee the consequences of research participation. And so in South Africa, any person younger than 18 years is actually regarded as a legal minor that requires parental permission to participate in research. And you see, because of this restricted autonomy, the child can say yes or no, but we often require that the parents also consent, so-called parental consent. We can look at cognitively impaired persons, so persons with a lower IQ, can you see, that can't really appreciate what research entails or what it means. And so in those cases there are special circumstances on how we can obtain consent, who should consent on behalf of that person, and how we can involve that person in the whole process. Persons with mental illness, obviously, that are severely depressed, suffering from bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, etc. All of those persons are sort of vulnerable persons that experience a restricted, remember, it's not a zero autonomy, it's a restricted autonomy. And so we must be careful when we recruit those persons in our research that we be aware of this, because special requirements are in place to ensure the proper consent is obtained from them. And so you can see, we will still respect those persons by involving them in the process. It's not somebody else speaking on their behalf. That's not what happens. It's often called assisted consent. The person is assisted by a competent person, either a legal guardian, a parent, a physician, etc., that can give consent or can help them to make a proper decision for themselves. And it brings us to this interesting one. In South Africa, when we do community research, we often work with communities where the individual is not such highly regarded, where decisions are making as a community, as a tribe, as a clan, for instance. And often that decision is made by the tribal authority, by the chief, for instance, and that person can speak on behalf of everyone else. And so this puts us in a bit of a bind to say, okay, that is how this community functions, because they would just say, if the chief said it's right, that's fine, we all take part. Or if the chief do not agree, then nobody takes part. Can you see? And so that is where we see that sort of communal autonomy. And so in these cases, it's a big challenge for researchers to say, okay, will we abide by one authority figure making a decision on behalf of everyone else, because it sort of flies in the face of autonomy for us. And the interesting thing here is the ethical principle is respect for cultural diversity. We will say, yes, we respect that, but we will, in our research interaction, take a responsible viewpoint to make a judgment on every person that we ask questions from. That if we feel that person is reluctant, we will not exploit that, but rather say, we're going to stand back and not continue with an interview, for instance. Can you see? So as a researcher, we will still respect that individual autonomy. In other cases, we do research, and in your faculty especially, think about art form or music or certain cultural practices. That doesn't belong to any one person. It's actually a group that participates and not one individual. And so in those cases, the challenge is to say, okay, let's get the group's permission to study whatever we do. And we've actually seen a few of the proposals coming from the arts faculty in this regard, where we look at, say, traditional music, and we will say, we will negotiate with the whole village, with the whole community, to say, this belongs to you as a group, doesn't belong to any individual. And so we then work with that. So that communal autonomy, can you see? So the individual is in a sense now less important than the group. The group here takes precedence in our decisions. Okay. I'm not going to play this, this video clip. Or let's do. We've got 5 more minutes. And it's a short video clip, 4 minutes. To just wrap up this discussion. It's a video clip that's not a case study or anything. It's just a person that talks about anonymity, privacy and confidentiality. He's speaking from an American perspective. And so he sometimes will use jargon that's sort of in the US system, but you will get the gist. I mean, don't bother about this, the stuff that we don't really use those words. And I'm going to stop it at one specific stage, because after that it continues for about another minute, but then it's really about specific American regulations, and there's no need for us to look at that. So let's look at this, and then I will just say one, 2 more words, and then we will finish up for today.
Federal regulations require researchers and IRBs to make sure that studies include, where appropriate, adequate provisions to protect the privacy of subjects and to maintain the confidentiality of data. We use the term privacy in reference to individuals and their right to control what other people know about them and their interactions with others. Confidentiality refers in particular to the security of records and information about individuals. Privacy applies to people. Confidentiality applies to information. Protecting the privacy of your subjects and potential subjects involves choosing appropriate settings for all study procedures and discussions, including the informed consent process. Choose locations where people outside your study won't see or overhear your interactions. Avoid discussing study participation in public. It may be appropriate to let individuals contact you to talk about your study or to arrange a convenient and comfortable time to meet. Since some people are more private than others, make sure, case by case, that your privacy measures meet the particular needs and expectations of your study population. Confidentiality, an extension of privacy, relates to the data you gather about your subjects. Information you take from a subject's medical record is protected under the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, or HIPAA. The Office of Human Research Protections requires that you maintain the confidentiality of any information you collect from non-public records, as well as information you collect from subjects directly in the course of your study. The National Institutes of Health, NIH, address two key concepts relating to the confidentiality of research data. Those are sensitive information and identifying characteristics. Sensitive information includes anything that a subject may not want everyone to know. For example, genetic profile, sexuality, illegal behavior, mental health, and any information that could lead to stigmatization or discrimination. Identifying characteristics are details that might enable those outside your study team to recognize a subject. Examples of identifying characteristics include a subject's name, social security number, detailed physical description, and genetic profile. No one outside your study team should have access to the identifying characteristics that link your subjects to their sensitive information. Password protection and encryption software are useful safeguards when storing confidential study data on computers. Never use shared or public computers to view or store information about your subjects. To prevent internet hacking, store confidential data on computers not connected to the internet. Avoid storing study data on portable devices that are easily misplaced or stolen. In your study's informed consent document, you must explain to subjects how you plan to keep their information confidential. Indicate all parties who may have access to sensitive information and describe the methods you will use to prevent others from gaining access to it.
So let's summarize the day then. I'm not sure you expected to hear all of this today, probably. But I hope that you will go away this afternoon and think a little bit different about what does ethics mean? Why do we do ethics? What's the importance of ethics, not just for research, but also in our personal lives, professional lives? Because we will get to that tomorrow when we get to integrity. Integrity links to professional behavior. And so we will sort of look a little bit at that tomorrow morning. But remember where it all starts. The ethics that we work with are primarily based in human rights. And I perhaps should have said it this morning, but human rights is not the only way to think about ethics. There's actually a lot of different ways to think of it. It's just the most dominant way that we think about ethics at the moment. But sometimes we look at other theories as well, things like utilitarianism, things like virtue ethics, egoism, deontology. Those are some of the words that you might encounter if you start looking at ethical theories. And so human rights is just the one way that we work, and in South Africa and globally, that is the system that we agree upon and that really guides most of our decisions. But sometimes we will look at other decisions too, or other ways of looking at it. Then it is based on human dignity, that inherent human worth of every person. And so that is the basis for our thinking about ethics, thinking about research ethics, thinking about research participants. Within human dignity, the first real practical one that we were thinking about is to consider the benefits and harms balance. The benefits that accrue to the individual, but also wider to society. So it's multifaceted. It's not just one thing. We look at all those benefits, and the benefits must be maximized, must outweigh the harms that we must always try and minimize. And remember all those different types of harms. It's not just drawing blood that causes harm. Many other things cause even more harm, I think. Think of the Milgram experiment. Needles cannot do that kind of damage or harm to participants that study did at all, not even close. And so we must always consider all the possible harms. And sometimes we can't. Sometimes harms occur that we couldn't foresee. That's part of research, because research is inherently risky. And then the last one is to remember that we looked at autonomy, that framework where individuals make decisions about their own lives. They have control over the information. They have control over the participation, remember. And so we linked it to things like informed consent. We linked it to things like voluntary participation. Because all of that shows a respect for autonomy, that we will never coerce, force people, deceive them, give them less than good information, trying to get their informed consent very quickly or even afterwards, as sometimes happen. We will respect the privacy of their information. And ways of doing that is by ensuring anonymity, and that we must be very careful. Anonymity linked to all kinds of identifying characteristics. And there's lots of those, and even more. I've recently read articles on this that actually says that by assuring anonymity and confidentiality to research participants is actually putting us as researchers at risk. Because information is accessible. If I really want to get information, I'll do that. Technology allows me. You can think the information is confidential because it's under a password on your computer. I can, just like that, get full access to that information. So it becomes harder and harder for researchers to actually live up to anonymity and confidentiality. And so we must pay more attention to this, because so easily things can end up on Facebook, on the net, etc. I don't know if you've ever tried it. Google your own name. You would be shocked at what information about you is on the net. Things that you would have never expected, your name will pop up. That's how freely information is available. And so we have a bigger responsibility, obligation to ensure proper anonymity and confidentiality as far as we can. We must just apply our minds to it. Tomorrow, we're going to look at those other three, at informed consent, vulnerability and integrity. And sort of then we will continue. And we're going to end off that discussion then by looking at a biggish case study, where I'm going to give you a bit of time to discuss it with each other and to just work through more than just the short case studies we've looked at now. But that's then for tomorrow morning. So let's stop here, and we will continue then sharp 8:30 tomorrow morning up until about 3 o'clock. So let's aim to finish at the latest around about 3 o'clock tomorrow afternoon, and then you can plan your lives around those times, and it should be good. Okay, so drive safely. Please come back tomorrow morning.